The morning sun had that sharp golden edge that made everything look too clean to be real. Perfect lawns stretched in both directions, white fences framed each yard, and the air was still. That kind of eerie stillness that only breaks when someone decides it should. I was crouched beside the curb, tightening the final screw into my brand-new mailbox, when I saw them, a trio moving in perfect sync across the street. The Oakrest Meadows HOA board. Leading the charge was Mara Green, visor tilted, clipboard hugged against her chest like a weapon of authority. Her face carried that familiar mix of superiority and suspicion, the expression of someone who didn't just believe she ran the world, but knew it. A few steps behind her came Doug Reeves, the enforcer, with a tape measure swinging from his belt like a sheriff's badge. "Good morning," I said lightly. "Mr. Carter," Mara announced, her tone formal, rehearsed. "Your mailbox color is in violation of Oakrest Meadows standards. It's non-compliant." I glanced at the slate-gray finish gleaming in the sunlight. "That's fine," I replied, standing up. "I'm not under your HOA." Her expression cracked for just a second, confusion flashing before giving way to disbelief. Doug actually chuckled under his breath. "Every house on this street falls under Oakrest Meadows jurisdiction," he said, voice smug. "Not this one," I told him, calm as ever. "You might want to double-check your boundary lines." They stared at me like I'd spoken a forbidden language. Mara straightened her visor. "You can't just opt out of community regulations. That's not how it works." "Then you'd better call someone," I said, dusting off my hands. Doug already had his phone out. Somewhere nearby, the hum of an engine started up. Within moments, a patrol car rolled around the corner, sunlight bouncing off its windshield, red and blue lights scattering across the immaculate driveways. Neighbors paused mid-lawn mow, eyes wide, phones half raised to record whatever was about to happen. 3 HOA board members stood at the curb like they were witnessing justice. What they didn't know was that they'd just stepped into my domain. I didn't just own this house. I owned the ground beneath their feet. Oakrest Meadows was the kind of suburb you'd find in a real estate brochure. Manicured, uniform, flawless. Every roof aligned at perfect symmetry, every hedge measured to an exact inch. The mailboxes, identical in shape and distance, stood like obedient soldiers. From the outside, it was the picture of peace. But peace like that doesn't happen naturally. It's enforced. When I bought the property, I thought I'd found a quiet corner to start over. 36 years old, mechanical engineer by trade, I liked precision but not people. The house came through a county foreclosure auction. A good deal, slightly worn, but solid. The paperwork was a tangle of expired covenants and overlooked parcels. Most bidders skipped it. I didn't. It wasn't until after I'd settled in that I realized how this neighborhood really functioned. It didn't run on kindness or community spirit. It ran on control. The clues were subtle at first. Neighbors who waved but never lingered. Lawns trimmed to an identical pattern, sprinklers clicking on in synchronized rhythm at exactly 6:30 every morning. And always hovering behind it all was Mara Green. If Oakrest Meadows had royalty, Mara was its queen. Mid-50s, linen pressed to perfection, clipboard never far from reach. Her reign wasn't elected, it was assumed, then enforced. Residents said she'd been HOA president since before half the homes were even finished. Her favorite phrase was practically a slogan, "Community standards are non-negotiable." Her second-in-command, Doug Reeves, was the kind of man who treated measuring tape like gospel. Stocky, sunburned, perpetually frowning, he spent his afternoons patrolling driveways looking for violations like a bounty hunter. Within my first week, they'd made their presence known, a note taped to my garage door. "Welcome to Oakrest Meadows. Please remember that all trash bins must be kept out of street view at all times." 2 days later, another. "Your porch light exceeds approved brightness by approximately 25 watts. I hadn't even unpacked half my boxes, and already they'd decided I was a threat to their perfect system. At first, I brushed it off. I'd dealt with worse. Corporate micromanagers, bureaucrats with too much time and too little power. Mara and Doug were just suburban versions of the same species. But underneath every friendly reminder, there was something sharper, a message written between the lines. This isn't your home. It's ours, and we'll tell you how to live in it. Most of the neighbors complied, out of fear, not respect. They smiled when Mara passed, then closed their blinds a little faster. Some even whispered about her, but always behind locked doors. Me? I wasn't built for submission. I deal in blueprints, numbers, and systems that work because they're logical, not because someone said so. That's what drew me to this house in the first place. It sat right at the edge of the development, separated from the next property line by a thin strip of county-owned land, a forgotten greenbelt. I liked the breathing room. The piece lasted about 2 weeks. Then came the envelope. A crisp white notice marked Official HOA Correspondence. Inside was a letter printed in formal black font. Violation number 001, unauthorized mailbox design. Your mailbox does not conform to approved color standards as outlined in Section 5, subsection D of the Oakrest Meadows Homeowners Charter. It demanded immediate correction, repaint or replace within 7 days, or face fines of $75 per day. At the bottom was a single, sweeping signature in bold blue ink, Mara Green President, Oakrest Meadows. I almost laughed. I flipped the letter over, expecting to find a contact number or at least some kind of appeal process. Nothing. Just a warning dressed up as a formality. I went inside, pulled out the glossy HOA welcome packet I'd found stuffed in my mailbox earlier that week. I flipped through it until I found the jurisdiction map. Bright green zones labeled Oakrest Meadows Phase 1 and Phase 2. That's when I saw it. My property, 2049. Oakrest Lane, sat just outside the boundary line. The HOA hadn't just overstepped. They were standing on land that wasn't even theirs, and that was when I decided to stop playing by their rules. Every lot on the map was neatly traced in bright yellow ink, each boundary like a stitch in a quilt, precise, uniform, controlled. I followed the perimeter line with my fingertip until I reached mine, tucked right against the edge where the trees began to thicken. Then I saw it. A faint gray outline, so subtle it could have been a printing error, marking the official county property limit. And just beyond it, my parcel stretched past the HOA's border by a slim strip of land. Barely visible, but clear enough for someone who dealt in precision for a living. My house wasn't inside their boundary at all. Just to be certain, I called the number printed on my deed. After a brief shuffle of transfers, a steady voice came on the line. Property records, Fairfax County, this is Janet. Hi, Janet, I said. I need to verify a jurisdiction detail. Address is 149 Oakrest Lane. Can you tell me if that's within the Oakrest Meadows HOA boundary? Her keyboard clacked in the background. Let's see. Parcel 24C. No, that address sits outside the Oakrest Meadows Charter. How far outside? 27 feet, she replied. That lot was never annexed when the HOA expanded in 2018. You're technically county property, unincorporated zone. A grin pulled at my mouth. So I'm not under their jurisdiction. That's correct, she said. They can't issue citations or fines for that parcel. Perfect. Thank you, Janet. For the first time since moving in, my shoulders loosened. Weeks of irritation melted away, replaced by something like amusement. All those warnings and taped notes now felt like static, background noise I could finally turn down. The peace lasted until that evening. My phone buzzed with a new email. Subject line, urgent, failure to comply with community standards. Sender, Mara Green, President Oakrest Meadows HOA. Mr. Carter, despite multiple notifications, your mailbox remains in violation of Oakrest Meadows Community Color Guidelines. The board has voted to escalate this issue under the Annexation Clause, Section 9D, which grants jurisdiction over adjoining parcels that share visible frontage. Immediate correction is required. Continued non-compliance may result in legal action and involvement of local authorities. The Annexation Clause. I almost laughed out loud. That wasn't law. It was fantasy printed on HOA letterhead. But her tone said enough. This wasn't about a mailbox anymore. It was about control, and I'd just pulled the rug out from under her throne. I printed Janet's confirmation email and slid it into a folder marked HOA Correspondence. Years of engineering had taught me one thing. Always document before you act. As the sun dipped behind rows of flawless rooftops, I stood at the edge of my lawn, staring across an invisible boundary. 27 feet. That tiny strip of land was the difference between ownership and obedience. I wasn't angry yet, just intrigued. I wanted to see how far they'd go to prove their authority over something they didn't own. And judging by Mara's tone, the war had already begun. By Thursday, the escalation started. A yellow envelope appeared on my door before sunrise. Penalty notice, day 3 of non-compliance. By noon, another email arrived with an updated balance. Day 4, $75 accrued total due. They'd even added a line at the bottom. Failure to pay may result in property lien. I couldn't tell if I should laugh or frame it. Then came the surveillance. Every morning, a different HOA board member walked their dog or measured property lines, snapping photos of my yard from across the street. I'd see the flash of a phone camera, followed by a quick turn of the shoulder. A few days later, the HOA's online neighborhood forum posted a new thread. Non-compliant property threatens. Oakrest aesthetic. Someone had uploaded a photo of my front yard, my gray mailbox gleaming proudly in the sun, with the address cropped out, but not enough to hide whose house it was. That's when the neighbors started acting differently. Smiles turned cautious. One woman crossed the street when she saw me walking my dog. Another slipped an unmarked note into my mailbox that said, "They did this to the Wagners, too. Don't back down." So I didn't. I printed everything, the notices, emails, screenshots, forum posts, and laid them neatly into my folder. Then I opened the county's online archive and began comparing maps. That's when I noticed something odd. The HOA charter on record listed its last official update as August 2018. The same year, they'd tried to expand their territory, but the file was labeled Proposed Amendment, Pending Submission. 6 years later, it was still pending, meaning Oakrest Meadows had been enforcing expanded boundaries that were never actually approved. They'd been illegally fining and regulating people outside their jurisdiction for half a decade, and no one had bothered to check. I decided to see it with my own eyes. The county records office smelled like dust, toner and coffee that had been reheated too many times. A woman at the counter waved me toward a cubicle marked Property Archives. Behind the desk sat a thin, older man with round glasses and a stack of rolled maps nearly as tall as his chair. "Looking for something, sir?" "Yeah," I said, setting my folder down. "I'm trying to confirm if Oakrest Meadows ever finalized their annexation charter after 2018. He started typing, fingers moving slowly over the keys. "Let's see here. HOA filings. Oakrest Meadows." His brow lifted. "Nope, nothing after 2018. Annexation proposal was returned for revision, never resubmitted. So officially, they're still limited to the 2010 survey lines." He turned the monitor toward me, the map glowing faintly on the screen. "My lot, 2049 Oakrest Lane, sat just beyond the shaded area. That's county land," he said. "Always has been. HOA's got no authority there," he smirked. "Let me guess they're still trying to fine you anyway?" "Every day," I said. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Typical. They think bylaws outrank the law." I thanked him and requested a certified copy of the original 2010 boundary map. He printed it on thick legal paper, stamped it with the county seal, and handed it over. As I studied it more closely, something else caught my attention, faint dotted lines stretching across my property into neighboring lots. Utility easements decades old for water, fiber, and drainage. Some of those lines ran directly under HOA signage and irrigation equipment. That meant part of their infrastructure, the pipes. The underground cables, even their decorative streetlight, sat on my land. It wasn't much, but it was enough. When I got home, I spread everything across my dining table like evidence in a case file. The letters, the maps, the certified stamp shining under the overhead light. Outside, the sunset hit my gray mailbox just right, casting a long shadow across the perfectly manicured street. That evening, Doug made another inspection walk. He crouched by the curb, tape measure in hand, pretending to check drainage clearance while aiming his phone camera at my house. I waved. He didn't wave back. By nightfall, my inbox pinged again. Subject: Escalation Notice. Final warning. Mr. Carter, your continued defiance of HOA authority constitutes willful noncompliance. Unless corrective measures are taken immediately, law enforcement will be notified. I stared at the email, then closed my laptop with a slow smile. If they wanted a war over 27 feet of land, they were about to find out what happens when you pick a fight with someone who builds blueprints for a living. The wording had changed. No longer non-compliance, but defiance. That was the shift. The tone of people who'd stopped pretending it was about rules and finally admitted it was about control. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, reading their latest email as if it were a weather forecast, predictable, full of wind, and mostly harmless. For the first time, I didn't feel cornered. I felt entertained, because now I had proof. In my hand sat documents that showed every inch of their authority stopped 27 feet short of my property line. And in that same stack of papers, printed, stamped, and signed, lay something better: the easements. Tiny forgotten rights-of-way that cut beneath half the street and directly through my lot. Their water lines, their fiber cables, even part of their decorative drainage system all ran under my soil. Their power was borrowed. Mine was written in law. I folded the certified county map carefully, tucking it back into its envelope. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Maybe I didn't just own one house. Maybe, in a way, I owned more of Oakrest Meadows than they did. Saturday arrived with bright sunshine and a tension you could feel in the air. Flyers had been slipped under every door. Mandatory compliance hearing, attendance strongly encouraged. You'd think someone had announced a trial instead of a neighborhood dispute. By noon, the cul-de-sac looked like a scene from a suburban courtroom drama. Folding chairs had been arranged in perfect rows across Mara Green's driveway. A portable podium stood at the front, its microphone squealing every time she tapped it. Doug Reeves hovered nearby, sorting through a pile of printed evidence, like he was prepping for a congressional hearing. Even a police cruiser was parked at the curb, one officer leaning casually against the car, sunglasses on, watching the spectacle unfold. I crossed the street carrying a single folder labeled HOA Correspondence, the same one that held the truth. Neighbors watched from their chairs, some whispering, others pretending to scroll on their phones as if this were just another HOA meeting instead of a showdown. "Mr. Carter," Mara began, her voice amplified and sharp as glass. "Thank you for joining us. This hearing is to address your continued refusal to comply with Oakrest Meadows community standards." "Refusal?" I said, keeping my tone easy. "You can't refuse something you were never part of." The reaction was instant. A wave of gasps rippling through the crowd. Mara's jaw tightened. "Let the record show the homeowner is uncooperative," she declared, as Doug dutifully scribbled on his clipboard, pen clicking like a metronome of misplaced authority. "Today," she continued, "we will review each violation in sequence. Item 1, unauthorized mailbox color. Item 2, unapproved landscaping. Item 3, obstruction of visual uniformity." I raised an eyebrow. "Obstruction of what?" "Uniformity," she repeated, chin lifting. "The consistent visual design of Oakrest Meadows is essential to preserving our property values." I glanced around at the identical houses, carbon copy flower beds, and fences so uniform they looked mass-produced. "Right," I said. "Wouldn't want to disturb the illusion." A few people stifled laughs. Mara pressed on. When she finished reading the charges, I stepped forward slightly. "Mara, before you go through all that paperwork, can I ask one question?" She crossed her arms, already defensive. "You may. Under which recorded covenant are you enforcing these rules?" A ripple moved through the seated crowd. The question hung in the air heavier than humidity. Mara blinked once, then said firmly, "All of them." "That's not an answer," I said. "Every HOA operates under a recorded charter. I checked the county records yesterday. Oakrest Meadows' last valid filing was from 2010. No annexations. No approved amendments. Nothing since." I took a step closer, my voice steady. "So unless you managed to file a new legal document in the past 12 hours, your jurisdiction ends 27 feet before my mailbox." Doug's pen froze mid-click. "We've been enforcing those standards for years," he said defensively. "Everyone abides by them." "That doesn't make them legal," I said calmly. "It just means no one's ever questioned you." A few heads in the crowd began to nod. The officer by the cruiser shifted, clearly listening now. Mara's voice trembled slightly as she said, "You are undermining community order. We will not tolerate rebellion." "Rebellion?" I smiled. "I'm just asking you to follow the rules you claim to enforce." That got a few nervous chuckles from the back rows. One older man even clapped once before realizing no one else joined in. Mara snapped her fingers at Doug. "Read the annexation clause." Doug flipped open a thick binder and began to read in a monotone. Section 9B. Community annexation may extend to adjoining parcels that share visible frontage. "May extend," I interrupted. "Not does. And only after the amendment is reviewed and approved by the county registrar," which it wasn't. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Someone whispered, "He's right," and a few others nodded. Mara's face flushed crimson. She slammed the binder shut. "This is not a debate. You are in violation, and you will repaint that mailbox immediately or face legal consequences." Doug added, "We have the right to involve law enforcement if necessary." I looked over at the officer. He hadn't moved, but his jaw twitched slightly, like he was fighting the urge to smile. "Actually," I said, raising a hand, "since you're already here, officer, maybe you can help us clear something up." Every head turned toward him. He pushed off the cruiser, walking forward slowly, sunglasses catching the sunlight. "What's the problem here?" he asked. Mara jumped in first. "This resident is refusing to comply with HOA regulations. We're requesting assistance enforcing community law." The officer looked at me. "That true?" I held out my folder. "My name's Ethan Carter. I live at 2049 Oakrest Lane. According to county records, my property sits outside the Oakrest Meadows jurisdiction by 27 feet. Here are the certified documents." He took the papers and read them carefully. The silence stretched. The only sound was a distant mower down the block. Finally, he looked up. "Ma'am," he said to Mara, "he's right. This address isn't under your HOA's authority." Her mouth fell open, but no words came. Doug blinked like someone whose programming had just crashed. "This is a civil issue," the officer added, handing the folder back to me. "The HOA can't enforce bylaws on property it doesn't govern." The crowd erupted into whispers. Mara tried to rally. "Then we'll pursue annexation retroactively," she snapped. "Good luck," I said, sliding the papers back into the folder. "I spoke to the county registrar yesterday. That annexation proposal was rejected 6 years ago." A few people laughed outright this time. Others just looked at each other, realization dawning. The illusion of power was cracking. Mara's voice shook. "This hearing is adjourned. We'll handle this through formal channels." She turned to Doug. "Write up a final notice." Doug hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the officer, uncertain. "Go ahead," I said lightly. "Write whatever you want." The officer's expression didn't change, but he reached slowly for his citation pad. The entire crowd fell silent, the tension thick enough to taste. For a single frozen moment, no one breathed, waiting to see what would happen next. Then I smiled. The officer's hand hovered over his citation pad for a moment, but he didn't write a thing. Instead, he paused, scanning the uneasy faces around him. The silence stretched tight as wire. "Let's all take a breath," he said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a breeze before a storm. "Start from the top." I opened my folder, the paper edges whispering like a secret being revealed, and handed him a few sheets. "Here's my property deed," I said evenly. "Certified last month. And this," I unfolded the next page and pointed to the raised seal glinting in the sunlight, "is the county's official jurisdiction map. According to this, the HOA boundary stops right here, exactly 27 feet before my line." He tilted the map toward the sun, the gold seal catching the light. The neighbors leaned forward, curiosity written all over their faces. The crisp paper gleamed like something sacred, a small artifact of truth in a neighborhood built on rules and repetition. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly. And you got this straight from the county registrar? I did, I said. Went there myself. Their logs show the 2018 annexation proposal for Oakrest Meadows was returned for revisions. It was never resubmitted, which means legally my property, Lot 209, isn't under their jurisdiction. Mara's voice cut through the air, brittle and high-pitched. That's impossible. We've been enforcing community regulations on this entire street for years. Every house here follows the standards. The officer glanced at her over the rim of his sunglasses. Being in charge doesn't make something legal, ma'am. Paperwork does. Doug stepped forward, his cheeks flushed. We have the right to maintain visual and community standards. The board voted unanimously. I met his stare. Then your board voted on imagination, I said. Because the county never approved it. That earned a few stifled chuckles from the back. Some of the neighbors hid their smiles behind their hands, eyes darting toward Mara to see how she'd react. The officer turned to Doug, tone steady and deliberate. Sir, your board's vote can't override recorded jurisdiction. Unless you can produce county certification proving annexation, this property is beyond your authority. He handed the documents back to me. Until proven otherwise, Mr. Carter's free to disregard any HOA directives. For a moment, it felt like the sunlight itself brightened, as though the day had decided which side it was on. Mara's composure cracked. She fumbled with her binder, flipping through pages so fast they rustled like a deck of cards. We have a clause, she blurted. Section 9B, annexation by visible frontage. That's not how property law works, the officer interrupted, tone dry as dust. Annexation isn't contagious. Laughter rippled through the crowd, louder this time. Someone coughed to hide it, but the smirks were spreading. Mara's face went crimson. You're mistaken, officer. I'll be contacting the sheriff's department about this. He gave her a small, patient smile. Ma'am, you're speaking to the sheriff's department. And right now, you're wasting police resources over a civil matter. That's not a good look. That statement landed with the weight of a hammer. Doug's shoulders sagged. His clipboard drooped like a flag at half-mast. We only wanted compliance, he muttered weakly. There's a difference between compliance and harassment, the officer replied. Mara blinked, stunned. For the first time since I'd moved in, her authority didn't fill the air. It leaked out of it. The neighbors she used to lecture now looked at her with something between disbelief and quiet satisfaction. You can't just show up and rewrite our rules, she managed. Her voice smaller now, though still sharp around the edges. I'm not rewriting anything, I said calmly. I'm just reading the parts you chose to ignore. The officer nodded. That's called due diligence. More folks should try it. From the back row, a familiar voice spoke up. Betty Walsh, who'd lived in Oakrest longer than anyone. So, officer, she said, her tone polite but cutting. Are you saying the HOA's been collecting dues and issuing fines to someone who isn't even under their coverage? That's exactly what I'm saying, he replied, clear and firm. A wave of murmuring swept through the crowd. Someone whispered, That's illegal, right? It can be, the officer said. Depends how long it's been happening and whether money changed hands. Mara went scarlet. This meeting is over, she snapped, but no one moved. The crowd just watched her unravel. Doug leaned in and muttered something under his breath, but she ignored him. We'll settle this in court, she hissed. You may think you've won, Mr. Carter, but this isn't over. I met her glare evenly. If you want to fight over land, I said. You might want to confirm who owns it first. The crowd reacted audibly. Gasps, quiet laughter, someone muttering, Damn! The officer tucked his citation pad away and adjusted his sunglasses. Ma'am, he said firmly, I strongly recommend you verify your legal authority before sending another notice. And don't involve law enforcement again unless there's an actual crime. This is civil, not criminal. Then he turned to me. You're fine here, Mr. Carter, but keep your paperwork organized. If they send more fines, save every copy. Already have, I said, tapping my folder. He gave a short nod. Smart man. Then he walked back toward his cruiser. As his vehicle rolled down the street, a strange calm settled over the neighborhood. The tension broke. It felt like the air itself exhaled. The sound of the car faded, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the faint chatter of neighbors rediscovering their voices. Mara stood rooted in place, her fingers white around her clipboard. Doug hovered beside her, pale and hollow-eyed. The rest of the board members scattered quietly, pretending to tidy up chairs just so they could escape the embarrassment. Across the street, two kids peeked from behind a fence, whispering. A dog barked twice as if signaling the end of the show. Mara turned back toward me, her voice trembling with anger. "You think this is funny? You think humiliating me in front of everyone makes you right?" I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "You did that yourself." She froze, lips parting but no words coming. Then she spun sharply on her heel and marched toward her SUV, Doug trailing behind her with the binder pressed to his chest like a life raft. The chairs stayed where they were, a scattered courtroom of defeat under the sun. Betty walked up, adjusting her straw hat. "Well," she said, smiling faintly, "I always knew that woman would pick the wrong fight one day. Guess I just gave her the opportunity," I said. As the crowd drifted away, a few neighbors patted my shoulder or offered quiet congratulations. "Good for you," one said. "About time," another added. 27 feet, huh?" That's poetic. When I finally reached my porch, the street looked the same. But it wasn't. Something fundamental had shifted. The illusion of control had fractured, and the cracks were showing. My slate-gray mailbox gleamed in the afternoon sun like a small victory monument. From the porch, I could see the subtle markers along the sidewalk, the invisible border she'd tried to erase with words and authority. But paper doesn't lie, and maps don't care who's in charge. If Mara thought this was the end, she hadn't learned a thing about boundaries. The following week, Oakrest Meadows grew quiet, too quiet. No violation letters, no emails, no passive-aggressive flyers. But silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. I could feel it. That pause before a storm returns twice as strong. So I used that stillness. Evenings that used to go to mowing or painting now went to research. County foreclosure listings, property records, zoning archives, I read them all. And buried deep in the county's public auction site, I found something worth smiling about. 3 parcels were going up for bid. One of them, Parcel 11B, the abandoned retention lot right behind the HOA clubhouse. Parcel 11C, a narrow 5-foot walkway linking the park to the cul-de-sac. Parcel 11D, a slim utility strip labeled Common Area Buffer. Each description came with the same peculiar note in the county listing: lapsed ownership, unpaid taxes, scheduled for auction. When I traced the coordinates on the county map, my grin came slowly, almost involuntarily. All 3 parcels sat smack inside Oakrest Meadows common areas. Their park, their beloved trail, even the little decorative fountain they used for HOA photos. Every inch of it technically stood on abandoned land the HOA didn't actually own. According to the county files, those tracts were still registered to the long-defunct developer that had gone bankrupt before the HOA was ever formed, meaning Oakrest Meadows had spent years proudly maintaining and policing land that legally belonged to nobody. That Thursday morning, I attended the county auction. The room was half empty, a few retirees and property speculators scattered across plastic chairs. Only one other bidder raised his hand, an older man searching for rural hunting ground. He lost interest after the first lot. By noon, all 3 parcels, 11B, 11C, and 11D, were mine. Paid in full, filed, certified. The clerk, a woman with half-moon glasses, eyed the paperwork as she pressed the county seal. "You realize what you've just bought?" she asked, tone half amused. "Oh, I have a general idea," I said. "Those lots control access to most of the HOA's shared facilities," she said, tapping the embossed seal. "You've basically bought their front yard," I smiled faintly. "Let's just say I'm investing in quiet." She laughed. "Quiet? More like leverage." That night, the deeds lay spread across my kitchen table, the paper edges glowing under the warm light. Each signature and stamp felt like a silent piece of armor. For months, they had written threats and warnings on paper. Now I had my own papers, heavier and sharper. The balance had changed. I didn't plan to use it for revenge, not exactly. I wanted clarity, the kind that makes bullies blink when the mirror turns. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Saturday. Fittingly, it would be held inside the same community hall that, according to the new deeds, now stood on my land. When I arrived, I wasn't alone. Beside me was Mr. Claney, a real estate lawyer from the county's land division. Sharp suit, quiet confidence. Behind him, a sheriff's deputy carried a small manila folder stamped verification copy. Inside, the familiar crowd had gathered again, the same faces who'd watched my last hearing. They sat in folding chairs beneath skylights pouring golden light onto the polished floor. Mara stood at the front, posture stiff, expression locked in a mix of disdain and discomfort. "Mr. Carter," she began coldly, "attendance today is restricted to active HOA members. You're not on that list." I smiled politely. "Actually, I'm here as a property owner. A few times over, in fact." Her eyebrows lifted. "Excuse me?" I walked to the front table and placed 3 folders down with deliberate calm. Each one was thick, labeled neatly. Parcel 11B, Parcel 11C, Parcel 11D. Doug frowned. "What are those supposed to be?" "County filings," I said. "As of last Thursday, these parcels are registered under my name. That includes the retention lot, the walking path, and the ground beneath this very building." The room went utterly still. You could hear the air conditioner hum. A few neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide. Mara's practiced smile faltered. "You're joking." Mr. Clean stepped forward smoothly. "No joke, ma'am. These titles were legally transferred and recorded by the Fairfax County Recorder's Office. Taxes are current and ownership verified. Mr. Carter is now the rightful deed holder for what the county designates as the Oakrest Common Tract." A low wave of murmuring rippled through the room. Doug blinked like he'd just swallowed dust. That can't be right. Those areas belong to the HOA. They're community property." "Not according to county law," Clean said evenly. "Your HOA's filings show years of unauthorized maintenance on unclaimed land. You've been collecting dues for property you never owned. That's absurd," Mara snapped. "The developer donated those parcels to Oakrest Meadows when we incorporated." Clean opened a document binder with surgical precision. "The developer intended to donate them, yes, but the transfer deed was never executed. When the company declared bankruptcy, ownership reverted to the county. Until last week," he turned a page and looked up. "Now it belongs to Mr. Carter." The sunlight caught the gold seal on the paper between us, reflecting upward like stage lighting. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Mara's jaw locked. "You mean to tell me the park, the pond, even this hall are technically sitting on my property?" I finished for her. The reaction was immediate. Neighbors whispered openly, some gasping, others laughing under their breath. One man in the back actually clapped once before stopping himself. Doug's pen slipped from his hand and clattered onto the table. Mara's face drained of color. "You can't just take that from us." "I didn't take anything," I said quietly. "I bought what you never cared to secure." The sheriff stepped forward slightly, his tone neutral but firm. "He's correct. I've reviewed the documents myself. These parcels are now private land. The HOA has no legal claim over them. The entire board looked stunned, their authority melting under the combined light of fluorescent bulbs and hard evidence. Mara's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. "This is extortion," she hissed. "You're trying to strong-arm us." "Extortion would imply coercion," Kleena replied calmly. "This is legal acquisition. Every transaction verified, recorded, and notarized." He slid a certified copy across the table, the county seal gleaming under the light. The sheriff nodded. "All filings are authentic. The retention pond, walking trail, and this hall are now privately owned by Mr. Carter. The HOA has no governing power over these areas." You could almost feel the temperature in the room drop as reality settled in. The same woman who had fined me over a mailbox now stood speechless in a hall, built on someone else's land. Mine. And for the first time since I'd moved into Oakrest Meadows, every single person in that room finally understood where the real boundary was drawn. The neighbors leaned in closer, their whispers spreading like wind through tall grass as realization sank in. The irony of it all was almost too rich to process. The same HOA board members who once strutted through cul-de-sacs issuing fines for mailbox paint or lawn. Height were now sitting in a building they didn't legally own. The very ground beneath them wasn't theirs. Mara's composure cracked, her voice trembling between outrage and disbelief. "You can't evict us from our own meeting hall." I crossed my arms. "Evict you? No. I'm just reminding everyone that if you're going to threaten people with property law, you should probably understand it first." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not cruel laughter, but the kind that comes when long-held tension finally breaks. It was the first genuine sound of relief I'd heard in that room since moving to Oakrest Meadows. Doug rubbed his temples, exhausted. "You really bought all 3 parcels?" "Every inch," I said evenly, "including the easements tied to your sprinkler system and parking area, which means technically your irrigation runs through my water line." There was a stunned pause and then a wave of applause. Soft at first, then stronger, more confident. It wasn't rebellion. It was equilibrium. For the first time, the residents felt the balance of power tilt back toward fairness. Mara's voice cut through the noise, shaky but defiant. "You can't just take control of a neighborhood like this." Mr. Clean adjusted his glasses, calm as ever. "You're free to challenge it, but considering your HOA's been collecting dues and maintaining property it never owned, I'd strongly advise against drawing more attention from the county." The sheriff stepped forward, his tone steady and unbothered. "He's right. Continuing to operate here without permission could legally count as trespassing." The room broke into scattered gasps and quiet laughter. Someone from the back muttered, "Guess karma finally paid her dues." Mara turned toward the crowd, her face pale and pleading. "You're really siding with him? He's dismantling everything we've built." From the back row, Betty Walsh, the same woman who once got fined for leaving her trash can out 10 minutes late, stood up. "Maybe that's the best thing that could happen around here." Applause followed again, hesitant but growing. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, painting the hardwood floor in long golden lines that looked almost like a curtain call. Years of quiet resentment were lifting. I looked around at faces, smiling, whispering, some wiping away tears. Doug stared down at his clipboard. Mara clutched hers like a shield that had stopped working. And I realized then that this wasn't revenge. It was restoration. I pulled another sheet from my folder, a single-page document, simple and clean. "For what it's worth," I said, "I'm not here to shut anything down. I've already filed a temporary use permit. The community can keep using the park and this hall free of charge. All I ask is that the HOA formally dissolve its claim to property it doesn't own." A stillness fell again, but not the kind born of fear. It was the quiet that comes when peace finally feels possible. The sheriff nodded approvingly. "That's fair." Mara's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. "You're doing this just to humiliate me," she said weakly. I shook my head. "No, Mara. You did that yourself when you called the cops on your neighbor instead of reading the county map." The words hit the air like a gavel striking wood. Final, echoing, undeniable. Laughter burst from the back rows, followed by a wave of clapping that grew until it filled the room. The light through the windows turned golden and soft, washing everything in warmth. The storm had finally broken. Doug looked across the table, his voice quiet but almost admiring. "You really bought the land under us?" I nodded. "If you're going to start a fight over property," I said, echoing my own warning from months before, "you should make sure you actually own it." The sheriff chuckled as he gathered his paperwork. "Well," he said, "I think that just about settles it." Outside, the sunlight felt cleaner. As neighbors filed out, the tension that had once clung to every conversation seemed to dissolve. People smiled, some shook my hand, others simply nodded with quiet gratitude. For the first time, laughter replaced the strained silence that had hung over Oakrest Meadows for years. The same street that once saw me accused and humiliated now felt lighter, freer. The sign at the entrance, Oakrest Meadows, a place of harmony, caught the sun as I walked past. And for once, the words didn't feel like a lie. By Monday, the silence that blanketed the neighborhood had a new texture. It wasn't tense anymore, but it was calm, like an exhale after years of holding breath. Mara's SUV was gone before dawn. By breakfast, screenshots from the HOA's private group chat were already circulating. Doug had tried to delete them, but not before half the neighborhood saw the smoking gun. His emails, her orders, and the damning line that sealed their downfall. Call the cops. Make an example of him. By noon, the story had spread beyond our cul-de-sac. The Fairfax Chronicle published a front-page article with a photo of me standing by the community hall, sunlight gleaming on the new private property sign. The headline read, "Homeowner outsmarts HOA, board in crisis after legal twist." It wasn't exaggeration. The HOA wasn't in crisis, it was collapsing. By Tuesday morning, 2 board members had resigned over email, citing governance concerns. Doug followed soon after, his final message reading like a confession. "We thought we were doing what was right. Turns out we didn't even know the law we were enforcing." No one replied. By Thursday, the HOA website went dark. The forum that once hosted endless violation notices now displayed a single sentence. "This domain has been suspended due to administrative non-compliance." The irony was thick enough to frame. The county issued a short statement confirming that ownership of parcels 11B, 11C, and 11D had transferred lawfully, and that Oakrest Meadows HOA no longer held any jurisdiction over those areas. Translation: no teeth, no turf, no control. Mara tried to host an emergency meeting that weekend. Only 5 people showed up, 4 of them just to turn in their clubhouse keys. By the following week, the board voted to suspend all operations pending review. It wasn't leadership. It was surrender. I didn't throw a party. I didn't gloat. I just stood on my porch one evening and watched the sunset spread across the park, my park now, and realized peace doesn't always come with victory. Sometimes it comes when the noise finally stops. The victory had already played out in front of everyone beneath the clear afternoon sun. What came after wasn't triumph. It was simply gravity taking its course, pulling down what had been standing on hollow ground for years. Yet, as days slipped by, I couldn't help noticing how the air in Oakrest Meadows felt lighter. Neighbors who used to glance away when I walked by now waved, some shyly, others warmly, as if testing what kindness felt like again. People who had once avoided me at the mailbox now stopped to chat. "So did you really buy the park?" one man asked, trying to sound casual, though curiosity flickered behind his grin. "Not the park," I said, sipping my coffee. "Just the land it's sitting on." He laughed, then nodded, less at the joke and more at the relief that normalcy was returning. Even Betty Walsh, who'd once been fined for nearly everything, showed up at my door with banana bread and an apology wrapped in sincerity. "We should have realized sooner," she said softly. "They made it sound like you were the problem." I smiled. They made me think that too for a while. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from the county asking if I'd serve as a community advisor during the HOA's official dissolution. I agreed, on one condition, that the new neighborhood charter be built around fairness instead of fear. They accepted. So one Thursday evening, I found myself back in the same hall where my so-called hearing had once taken place. But now the tables were round, not lined in accusation. No podium, no microphones, no clipboards, just neighbors, paper, and sunlight filtering softly through the tall windows. This time, the light didn't feel harsh or judgmental. It felt warm. The new bylaws were refreshingly simple. No fines without proof, no surveillance without consent, no authority extending beyond recorded property lines. The vote passed unanimously. The old Oakrest Meadows didn't come back that night. It evolved. Respect had replaced regulation. Betty smiled and said, "Maybe you should have been president all along." I chuckled. "I think I've had my fill of politics." That night, as I walked home beneath a sky painted with deep blue and quiet stars, I noticed something new. A for sale sign stood in front of Mara Green's house, swaying gently in the porch light. The bold red letters glowed, available immediately. Through the half-open blinds, her once crowded display shelves were empty, gathering dust. The woman who had dictated mailbox colors and fined people for porch plants was leaving the neighborhood she'd once ruled. By morning, Doug was standing by the curb watching a moving truck pull up. He didn't wave, just nodded, a silent acknowledgement of endings. Maybe he understood, as I did, that no one had needed to humiliate Mara. Truth had already done the job. Within days, the HOA shed was cleared out, its sign gone. The community website redirected to a new message. Welcome to Oakrest, a free neighborhood again. For the first time, those words meant something real. The lawns were still neat, the houses still pastel, but the air felt different. Laughter carried down the sidewalks now. Conversations didn't stop when certain people walked by. My gray mailbox still stood proudly under the morning sun, untouched, unpainted, unpunished. The neighborhood didn't look new. It just finally felt honest. Justice hadn't come in sirens or courtrooms. It came quietly, in daylight, when the truth reclaimed the ground it had always belonged to. Summer rolled into Oakrest like an overdue promise. The sameness that once defined every house began to fade. One family planted wildflowers. Another replaced their roses with cacti. Children rode bikes across driveways that no longer needed to match. The hum of lawnmowers blended with laughter and the scent of barbecue. It finally sounded like living, not conformity. The HOA was gone, officially dissolved, its records archived under the county's quiet stamp. In its place, a volunteer-led community group took shape. No fines, no power trips, just shared care and morning coffee funds. The county even sent a letter congratulating Oakrest on its successful transition to cooperative self-management. Bureaucratic, sure, but it made me grin. I donated part of my land, the park, the trail, and the pond, back to the community for permanent use. A bronze plaque went up at the entrance beneath an old oak tree, the first one ever planted in the neighborhood. It read simply, "Respect is stronger than rules." That oak's roots had grown deep, steady, unshaken. Everything the old HOA hadn't been. Sometimes on calm mornings I'd walk by and see kids drawing chalk suns and stick figures across the sidewalk nearby. Once that might have been a violation. Now it was joy. Betty still dropped off banana bread every Sunday. Doug had moved a few streets over but came by sometimes, shaking his head with a sheepish smile. "You know," he said once, "I sleep better without those board meetings." No one had seen Mara again. Her house sold quickly, to a young couple with 2 kids and a golden retriever who barked at butterflies. Fitting, really? The past here had turned into a story, not a scar. People sometimes asked how it all began, how a dispute over a mailbox unraveled an entire system. I always gave the same answer. They called the cops. I called the county. That line always got a laugh, but the truth was simpler. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. One afternoon, I found a note taped to my mailbox. Not a violation this time, but a thank you card. Inside, it read, "You didn't just fix a rule. You reminded us we're neighbors, not suspects." No signature. Just that. Months later, the old community hall had been reborn, a quiet little art room and book exchange. The windows that once glared down on conflict now glowed with soft light as kids painted inside. The sheriff stopped by one day, walking the trail around the pond. "You did good here," he said. "You put the law back where it belongs." "I just read the fine print," I told him. He smiled. That's where the truth always hides. He wasn't wrong. Truth had always been there, buried in dusty county files, waiting for someone to notice. Now, when I walked the block, I saw mismatched mailboxes, bright flags, and front porches full of individuality. Imperfection had become our neighborhood's new identity, and it suited us perfectly. One evening, I stopped by the park just as the sun began to set. Kids raced down the hill, their laughter echoing over the pond. One shouted, "Tag, you're free!" The word hit me deeper than I expected. Free. It no longer sounded like rebellion, it sounded like life. As I headed home, I paused by the bronze plaque again. Respect is stronger than rules. Someone had left a small bunch of daisies at its base. No one knew who, and no one cared. The air was quiet again, but this time, it was peace, not pressure. For the first time since I'd moved here, I wasn't fighting anything. I wasn't defending, arguing, or proving. I was simply home. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not the land, not the courtroom win, but the reminder that peace doesn't need permission. It just needs courage. 6 months later, Oakrest woke under golden light again. The sprinklers hissed softly, the lawns shimmered, and laughter floated through open windows. A young family now lived in Mara's old house. No one mentioned her name anymore. History had become harmony. I stood beside my gray mailbox, coffee in hand, smiling at how beautifully ordinary it all was. The old HOA sign at the entrance had been replaced with a new one. Welcome to Oakrest, a free community. Beneath it, a small brass plate read, "Freedom isn't chaos. It's trust." I didn't know who put it there, but I like to think we all did. A few days later, a postcard arrived from Sheriff Grant, a photo of the county courthouse beneath a cloudless sky. On the back, in neat handwriting, "Neighborhood's quiet again." "You did good." I placed it on my fridge beside a magnet that read, "One small decision can change the whole street." Some evenings I still walk past the pond and watch the reflection of the sunset dance on the water. The scene always reminds me of how it started. One flashing red light, one stubborn mailbox, one man who decided to check the map instead of bowing down. Truth didn't roar that night. It waited for morning. And when the sun rose, it shone through everything false until only what mattered remained. Now the laughter, the mismatched fences, the kids shouting, "Free!" They're proof enough Oakrest isn't perfect. It's just real. And maybe that's the story worth telling. That peace once found doesn't demand silence. It invites sunlight. Because control hides in shadows, but truth always finds the light. Have you ever seen power disguise itself as protection and watched the truth quietly take it apart?